Hello, everybody. I'm Sam Menser, the instructor at Chattanooga Public Library's recording studio downtown on the second floor. Today, I would like to talk about an introduction to recording in a large recording studio like the one that we have at the library. So, any type of professional or commercial level studio, and compare that and contrast it to a home studio. And not just a home studio, but a home project studio, which is what most people have. Just like a small setup, couple microphones, things like that. Certainly, there are commercial level and professional studios in people's homes, so technically those could be home studios. But we're going to look at those entry level kind of setups that people have at home versus recording in a place like the library. So, when I think about the four main differences that sort of just jump out to me at a large studio versus at home would be the type of equipment, and there's certainly going to be a lot more of equipment, and we'll talk about those specifics, and the signal flow. And the signal flow goes along with the equipment that you have in a commercial level recording studio. So with that being said, I think we'll focus on signal flow in the next episode just because it's a heavy topic and there's a lot to talk about with that. And then I'll kind of touch on pre-production and then some costs and expenses. And the pre-production will be kind of a small, short recap where the costs and expenses isn't that big of a deal if you come to record at the library, because if you have a card, it's free. But if you do decide to go to a place in town or even up the road in Nashville or down the road in Atlanta, you will have much more costs. And so I'll just give you some tips on preparing for that kind of stuff. Looking at this here, we can see that there are quite a few differences in a professional studio versus a project studio. And I'd like to start with the mic selection. So if you come to the library or a commercial studio, you're going to find what's known as a mic locker, and there's going to be a lot of mics to select from, all different shapes and sizes. They produce different tonality, coloration, things like that, and you can mix and match them. And then even throwing different preamps in the equation, you can really create a wide variety of sonic colors to explore. And I call this basically microphone alchemy. And that's something that we don't really get at home. Personally, I just have a handful of tried and true mics. When I do go out and record at studios and places, I make sure I check that to see what kind of microphones that they have there in order to sort of maximize my time utilizing those microphones. So that's a benefit of the professional studio. Project studio, like I said, you might just have a few to play around with. Tie lines. Now, these are something that are unique to studios with multiple rooms and that are separate from the control room. Let's put it that way. So what you'll have, and we'll just use the library for an example, the studio. You'll have a control room, and then we have 3 other separate rooms that you can do live tracking in. So the rooms are different sizes, but in each room there's a panel called a tie line panel, and what that does is it accepts the XLR cable from the microphone into the tie line's input, and then it sends that signal behind the scenes through the wiring to what's known as the patch bay. So you can think of it as the first entry point to the pathways in the studio in the signal flow. The patch bay, I'll go way more in depth on this next time, but basically what it is, it's a switchboard where you can send the signal to different places. And we'll talk more about that, but you're only going to really find a patch bay when you have so many inputs going on that it sort of creates this central hub where you can say, well, I want this microphone from this room to go to this preamp over here. So it's really your organizational centerpiece. And that's a diagram, or that's a picture of it right there, so you can see it. It's a little complex, but we'll talk about that later. And then you're going to go into the preamplifier section, and the preamplifier takes that microphone signal and it boosts it to a point where the recording device can capture it, whether it be you're using tape, or in our case, we're using digital audio recording. So we use Pro Tools, and that's what will be capturing that signal. Now, prior to that signal going into the digital audio workstation, it will go through a conversion process. And in our studio, we have an analog to digital converter, and it takes the analog signal and converts it into a digital signal. So then Pro Tools can record it. At home, all of these different things that I just mentioned, the tie lines, the patch bay, the preamplifiers, the converters, they're all sort of congregated into one small box that you'll call an interface. So here's a picture of a common interface, and you can see just two inputs on this. So all of these things happen within this interface. There's your entry point, your input. There is a preamplifier of some sort, and the conversion process happens from analog to digital in here. And then your output, it could be USB into your computer. So all of those that are separate processes in a recording studio are going to be just basically simplified into this one small box. Now, what you're going to miss out on is the quality of the preamplifiers and the quality of the converters are going to be of much higher quality because you have dedicated devices doing these different, taking out these different processes. So that's one huge advantage to a studio. Plus, you'll probably have different types of preamps to use as well. So moving on, they both situations will share a digital audio workstation. We use Pro Tools, but certainly some studios use Logic or Ableton. There's many different DAWs nowadays that you can use. That being said, this is where the studios are somewhat similar, because you're basically just looking at your digital control surface in that regard. And speaking of control surfaces, at the studio we have, and here's a picture of it, a large format recording console. And it's basically, in this case, it's basically a control surface, but it's large and it has 24 channels. So it can be kind of daunting when first sitting down on a console like this. But ours is great because it corresponds with Pro Tools. So if I move a fader on the desk, it's going to show that fader move within Pro Tools, because both Pro Tools and the console are made by Avid, the same company. So they are integrated together, their movements. And it makes it a lot more simple than if you were in a studio with a large format console and you move the fader on the console and it doesn't reflect that in Pro Tools. So there you have basically two different banks of faders to control, two different gain stages. So at home, it's optional. You could get a small control surface to use. Some people have small little mixers that they might use to sort of maximize their inputs on their interface and so forth. From that stage, we're actually going to just talk about something really quick, and that's the plugins. Plugins are basically a virtual or software version of what was analog hardware and rack-mounted devices, because these devices would be inserted on racks in the studio. And we have a couple rack-mounted devices. They're mainly for the stereo bus, and I'll talk more about those later, but that's essentially what you have there. Is what we lack in the studio in hardware gear, outboard gear, as people call it. We make up tenfold with the amount of plugins that we have. So those are two differences. So at home, you can have a ton of plugins. Even if you don't have a lot of space, if you just have your laptop, you can have 150, 200, 300, however many plugins that your computer can handle at home. So it's a great way to save space and still have some really cool effects in the studio to record with. High quality monitors. You're definitely going to have high quality monitors at a recording studio when you go into them. They're probably going to be a lot larger than you would find at home. And at home, you're probably going to have some consumer level monitors, maybe even some computer speakers. Maybe you're just listening on headphones. But in the studio, you're going to have in the commercial studio, you're going to have larger monitors. We have two sets of monitors, in fact, so you can switch between the two because all monitors are going to sound a little bit different. So it gives you the ability to check out your mixes and such in different monitors to hear how the frequency response is between different types. And that being said, you're also going to be in an acoustically treated room if you go into a studio. Rather that, and at home, most people don't have treated rooms, or if they do treat their rooms, they might not be. They're definitely not going to be to the level of a commercial or a professional studio. But at home, you might have some good acoustic treatment, but most likely you're not spending the amount of money to treat your room like you will find in a recording studio. All right, well, before I go too much in depth into signal flow, I want to say thanks for watching, and we'll pick up where we left off next time. And I hope you enjoy it, and stay safe, and take care. Bye.